Zach Winfield from Zoo Advisors. It is great to see you again. Thanks so much for joining us on this Attraction Pros COVID-19 video series. Tell us how you're doing. What's going on with Zoo Advisors these days, and with you personally.
Hi guys, thanks for having me. I think, all things considered, we're doing pretty well. We're staying busy. Some of the project work has slowed down a little bit, and obviously travel is off the table at the moment, but we're still finding ways to keep ourselves useful and engaged with the community.
So what are some of those ways that you're keeping engaged with the community and with your clients and all that?
Well, like you guys are, we've hosted quite a few webinar series over the past month, at least once a week across a whole range of topics. Some of them, real general, others very specific, diving into little nooks and crannies of operations. Towards sort of the beginning of the crisis, I think we also tried to be kind of a clearinghouse for information for our industry and for our clients about what they needed to know about PPP and the loan programs, and what kind of documents they needed to get in order to be ready for those. And now that information is everywhere, but we've tried to be out of the gate early with that stuff.
That's awesome, Zach. I'm curious, some of the things that we've been seeing so far, nobody has a crystal ball, right, to know where we're going. But, some of these things we're thinking are going to be kind of temporary. Some of these things might be permanent. So I'm curious, from your standpoint, what are you seeing or what are you feeling that might be a temporary measure and what might be long-term?
Well, that's a great question. Obviously, nobody specifically knows the answer. I tend to think that, regression to the mean is a very powerful force, and that people aren't going to want to stay cooped up and away from each other physically forever. I think that we're a social species, and that people want to come together, and at what point people become more comfortable with that and under what conditions is a question. But I'm fairly bullish and optimistic about people returning to visitor facilities, cultural institutions over the medium to long term. What things might change sort of permanently. I think, just as an example, one thing that we've talked about for a long time, for years, way before this COVID crisis, was the potential for sort of front gate and entry operations to change radically, and the whole paradigm about lining up at a ticket booth and waiting in line for 10 or 15 or 20 minutes is a sort of inefficient way to get people into your facility. It's not the right foot to start off on with your guests. And now that there are sort of more serious implications about those gatherings, I think is a good opportunity for organizations to think about, well, what can we do in terms of pushing as many people to buy their tickets online ahead of time as possible, all sorts of contactless transacting. I think, there's a lot of upside to that paradigm in entry operations, and I hope that some of those changes that have been brought on by necessity will stick around, permanently.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And this is something that Matt and I have been talking about for the last couple of days. Is that there's been so many emerging trends within the industry, and some of them have been more further along than some others. But something like contactless payments and purchasing online, that's certainly nothing new, but it also has not completely overtaken the ticket booth and the on-site purchase anyway. And this, is something that could potentially accelerate that into greater efficiencies of the arrival process. Because you make a great point, it's not a great foot to start off on if you have to wait 15 to 20 minutes for something that you are required to do just to now get into the gate. So
yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that people have complained about for years, right? And one of the things that they don't like along their visitor journey is the entry experience. And pushing people online is great. It's a big opportunity, but there's also challenges because for all the problems that waiting in lines create, there are also opportunities that come along with that, right? Opportunities to upsell people at the gate or convert visitors to members or annual pass holders. And if you're all of a sudden pushing 90% of your visitors online, you have to think about how you're going to capture that revenue, how you upsell people online, how you talk to them about annual pass or membership online, which is a whole different challenge.
yeah, true.
Zach, one of the kind of cool things about zoos specifically is that they still had to have people there to take care of the animals, right? And so that has spawned a lot of content. It spawned zookeeper talks and things like that. And in fact, I was talking to a zoo client in Sweden yesterday, and he said, you know, we've got all the same expenses. Why not just open the gates and see what happens, right? So they said, we're going to be open every day, and we're going to just let people in, you know, very, very few. And even if we make just a couple of dollars, we'll be a few steps ahead. So I'm curious, from your standpoint, what are those creative things that you're seeing some of your clients do to either stay in your guest's mind or even make a little revenue at this time?
Absolutely. So one of them is not a new idea at all. It's actually quite well-worn territory, but no one was sure if it would work. And that's just the concept of basically asking people for contributions. You know, most of our clients, 95% of our clients, 99% of our clients are nonprofits. So they have established development programs, and they thought, oh gosh, are people going to support us in this time? You know, everybody's finances are really tight, and they put together sort of you know, ad hoc fundraising programs. Basically, they're just asking people for their support, and they've been extremely successful. It came as a surprise to me, but a lot of our zoo clients have really had good success there. So that's one thing. Another, Elmwood Park Zoo, which is a zoo here in Philly. I think this was a fantastically creative idea. They are making their animals and zookeepers available for like Zoom drop-ins. So for a small fee, you can have a zookeeper and a giraffe, or a zookeeper and an armadillo, you know, pop in for a 15-minute sort of presentation and Q&A on your Zoom meeting, which I think is just so cool, so creative.
Yeah.
I love that idea. And then, you know, San Antonio Zoo, I think they just announced yesterday that they're converting part of their zoo to a drive-through experience. And that's, you know, obviously there are operational challenges with making that happen, and not every zoo can do that. You got to have pathways that can accommodate cars. But I think that's a really cool idea and very creative.
Yeah, those are some good ones. I hadn't heard the Zoom one, and I know that there's definitely someone in marketing is going to come up and capitalize on that play on words. There is putting the zoo in Zoom or whatever that is. I don't know. So one of the actually, I have a question about the first thing that you mentioned, as far as you know, the fundraising, and that zoos are seeing a lot of success in that. Those that are seeing it most successful, how are they positioning that message? Because I feel like it could be very easy. It's a little bit of a tightrope to ask people for money to support a cause where there are, or people are very financially strapped right now. A lot of the population is. And B, that the immediate top of mind cause that people might want to donate to might be something that is specifically related to COVID. So as far as bringing in or stressing the message of how, you know, animal conservation and care and supporting your local zoo, aquarium, whatever it is, it needs to continue to be top of mind when there's only one subject going on in the news right now, basically.
Sure, I think it's really twofold. One is that one of the advantages that zoos and aquariums have is they have tremendous reach. They have huge email lists. They are, you know, the local zoo is always sort of a gem in the crown of the community. So they start from a position of really goodwill in their communities. And second is, you know, your local zoo is just historically iconic, right? Your grandparents went to the zoo, they took your parents, and now they take you to the zoo. It's part of the cultural fabric. And zoos have done a really good job of letting people know that they're not just, you know, entertainment facilities, they're places of learning, they're nonprofits, they're, you know, integral to society at this really fundamental level. And so when they go out and say, hey, you know, we really need your support more now more than ever, right? Our mission, our conservation education mission, is just as important now as it was yesterday, if not more important. You know, we are worthy of your support, despite you know, the competing philanthropic priorities or wherever your bank account is at right now. And I think constituents have stepped up to that really admirably.
Yeah, that's one thing that I've noticed working with more and more zoos and aquariums over the years, is they have that sort of that they're embedded in the community a lot more than, say, a theme park, right? Or an amusement park. I mean, there's obviously community awareness and people support that, but to your point with conservation and education, I think there's a stronger pull to want to support that institutions so that they'll be around later when we can go out and visit them. And now you can bring your children there and visit and have that same experience.
Yeah, they're staying in front of people in a way that I think a lot of organizations aren't and simply can't, right? Like every zoo in the country is now doing keeper talks on Facebook or on YouTube, and they're filling a hole, right? Everybody who has kids right now is like, oh God, what am I going to do with my kids all day? We finished their schoolwork by noon, and now you have all these other opportunities to watch these fascinating, engaging live streams. So they're staying in front of their constituents.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's really cool to see how they've been able to really kind of keep that digital presence and that guest engagement, even while they're not able to welcome guests at this time.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to make sure we allocate enough time for what you have put together as far as from a strategic planning standpoint and this kind of operating model. So can you walk us through that, and feel free to take the opportunity to share your screen as well into what you've been working on.
Yeah, so one of the challenges that we've been hearing a lot about in our industry, and I'm sure in your industry and basically every industry, is folks are trying to figure out, what the next 12, 18 months holds for them, sort of operationally and financially, and what the implications are of the shutdown. And one of the problems is there are a lot of variables that they don't know, and they're trying to do their due diligence and be responsible about how they can be prepared for any number of unknown scenarios. And so a lot of these organizations are doing scenario planning, which is an onerous process where you have to crunch a lot of numbers and start tweaking variables. And so what we did was we put together this tool, and I'll share my screen right now so you guys can see it. That just sort of streamlines and simplifies that process. So do you have it up now? You can see it?
Yep.
So what this is, it's an Excel-based model, and what it does is you basically input a bunch of your performance metrics for the last 6 quarters, right? 2019 through the first 2 quarters of 2020. And the model then allows you to tweak variables for each sort of operational and financial line item, and then returns kind of what the outcomes could be, right? So if you're testing scenarios where, okay, we think that in Q3 2020 we'll be able to reopen, but our capacity will only be at 35%. Well, you have this little slider here where you can say, okay, my capacity is going to be 35% in Q3. I go up to 50% in Q4, 75% in Q1 2020. And then for each of these line items, right? General admissions. We think we're going to have to discount our general admissions to either reflect a diminished experience, right? Maybe half the zoo or aquarium or other organization is closed, and we want to lower our admission fee to reflect that. Or maybe we're just going to be discounting admissions to entice people to come back. We think our retail operation is going to be halved, or our food service operation is going to be quartered, or we won't be running summer camps or special events, whatever. For every single line item, on both your revenue side and your expense side, we're going to be at 75% capacity in personnel, or we're going to be cutting back on marketing, or whatever your line item is. You can tweak every single line item for every quarter, and the model then correlates your visitor capacity to all your per caps based on all these variables you've changed, and makes a projection based on actual historical performance for what the future will hold.
This is really cool.
Huh. Yeah, and then you can say, okay, we actually don't think we're going to open at all in Q3 2020. We think we can't open until Q4 2020. We can make this tweak, and the model says, okay, you're closed Q3, you're open Q4, or maybe you don't think you can open until Q1 2021. Whatever variable you want to tweak, every single variable that we could think of is baked in here. And it just sort of takes some of the pain out of doing all this scenario modeling. And it's still, it's still a little bit of a process, right? The model doesn't take all of the work out of it for you, but basically what we're hoping to do is that you only have to plug in these numbers once, and then you can just start tweaking variables and see what some of these future scenarios will look like for you. And, it's totally free. Anybody who wants it can download it off our website. All the instructions are here. They're built-in instructions on how to use it. And we hope it's useful for some folks out there.
This is really cool and incredibly helpful. I've got a question about facility capacity, because I've been seeing like a lot of, particularly like in Florida's like reopening task force, and they're saying like theme parks or zoos can only operate to X% capacity, and it's like, well, what is that number actually based off of? Because it could make the assumption that you are under normal operations you're at 100% capacity, which you're not. So is it based off of projected attendance? That's what it looked like when I saw like Q3 and 4 2021 versus Q3 and 4 2019.
So thinking about facility capacity, we actually have a methodology that we're bought into at this point for this. So the assumption that we're working under for many of our clients is that all indoor facilities will be closed for the time being. So what we're asking them to do, we're recommending they do, is they look at what all of their outdoor capacity is on a square footage basis, right? So let's say you have, 1,000 square feet of outdoor capacity, which is just an easy number to work with. It's obviously tiny. Your real capacity is much higher. But if the social distancing recommendations stay in place at 6 feet, that means that for each party you need 144 square feet of area to safely accommodate them at that capacity. Now we know that that's not per person but per party, because people who are cohabitating don't need to socially distance from each other. So let's say your average party size is 2.8 visitors. So you'd multiply your average, you divide your square footage by your total square footage of your open space by 144 per party, and then multiply that number by your average party size 2.8, and that gives you your new capacity. And you divide that number by whatever your previous full capacity was, and that gives you a sort of roundabout number to figure out what your current crisis capacity load can be. That's just one way to start thinking about it. Some simple math.
And then the next thing would be now the guest flow of organizing that capacity to make sure that, if you've got a feeding or a show or whatnot, or a demonstration, that now all those averages go out the window because everyone's moving in clusters. So it's about continual spacing throughout the property.
Right. There's a lot of variables at play. Some zoos are looking at putting into place sort of like one-way travel. One of the clients I was talking to last week is ready to roll out a map for their zoo where you don't just roam around the zoo. You enter and you go along this path in one direction, and then you go out the exit.
Take the IKEA approach.
Mm-hmm.
Should make it more efficient. So
yeah.
Yeah. Well, Zach, this has been fascinating just to kind of get your insight and specifically to see that tool. Thinking about what we're going through now and kind of where we're going, do you have any sort of last or final thoughts that you'd like to share with the people that might be watching?
I think that, like I said, I'm fairly optimistic about the next 12 to 18 months. I think some version of normal will come back at some point. Organizations need to be really smart and strategic about how they reopen. Keeping guests safe has to be the number one priority. Unfortunately, I think there are probably some organizations who won't make it through this process, and that's a sad reality. But the ones who have the best shot at making it through are the ones who really put the time and effort into strategizing about how they can get creative with creating revenues and controlling expenses in the short term, and then having a plan to reopen safely and then communicate that when the time comes.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. Zach, before we finish up, can you give us a brief tour of the looks like the pottery clay masks on your wall behind you?
Yeah. So I grew up in Mexico, actually, in Mexico City, and so while we were there, my parents got in this habit of they collected masks. So there used to be this one house this one room in the house I grew up in that was just full of masks. Every wall of the room was covered in masks. And when my parents downsized, I said, "Hey, why don't you guys throw me some of those?" And so now they're my Zoom background.
That's awesome. If people want to download that spreadsheet, you said that it's free and that you can download it off the website. Is that just at zooadvisors?
.com, and you can find it. It's on our blog. The blog's called Data and Analysis. It's fairly easy to find, or anybody can shoot me an email at zwinfield@zooadvisors.com if they have questions about it or can't find it on the website.
All right, cool. Well, Zach, thanks so much for joining us here on the video series. We really appreciate your insights, and then for walking us through that spreadsheet. That's absolutely an incredible tool to be able to use to just project and define strategy and everything. So with that said, looking forward to the next time that we can see each other in person. And until then, stay healthy, stay safe.
Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for having me.